From the moment a girl was born into a Victorian household, she was quietly handed the invisible script of a life she did not choose, a life in which every action, word, and thought would be measured against a rigid societal expectation that her ultimate purpose was to marry well and maintain a perfect household. Parents watched with anxious pride as their daughters learned to curtsy, speak softly, and perform needlework with painstaking precision, each lesson reinforcing the idea that domestic grace and social decorum were more valuable than intelligence or ambition. Childhood was carefully structured to instill compliance. Dolls, miniature kitchens, and toy furniture were not merely playthings, but rehearsals for the performance of adult domesticity, teaching young girls that the home would one day be both their stage and their cage. Music, drawing, and French were introduced as accomplishments rather than genuine passions, meant to charm suitors rather than enrich the mind. While storytelling and reading were often restricted to moralistic tales, emphasizing obedience, piety, and the virtues of patience, conversations were monitored. Any question or opinion that hinted at independence or curiosity beyond the domestic sphere was gently corrected or ignored, ensuring that girls internalized a sense of limitation as natural. Even friendships were subtly guided toward alliances that might enhance family reputation, and leisure time was filled with supervised, appropriate activities that reinforced the performance of femininity. Embroidery, piano practice, polite walks, and social calls, compliments and admonitions alike, carried an undercurrent of future expectations. When praised for a delicate gesture or a refined posture, she was being prepared for the scrutiny of potential suitors. When admonished for speaking too boldly or acting out of turn, she was being trained to suppress any sign of rebellion that could undermine her future marriage prospects. Slowly, these routines shaped her understanding of the world. She would learn to value charm above intellect, patience above ambition, and appearance above personal satisfaction. The invisible pressures of conformity were relentless, embedding themselves so deeply that she might never question them, accepting as natural a life in which her desires were secondary, her movements restricted, and her choices preordained. By adolescence, she had internalized the notion that the highest achievement for a woman was to secure a husband of sufficient means and respectability, and that failure in this task would be seen as both a personal and familial disgrace. The dreams she might have nurtured, travel, learning, careers, were quietly suppressed or redirected towards socially acceptable outlets, leaving her unprepared for a world outside domestic walls. Even the private sphere of thought, she learned to mask curiosity, conceal dissent, and perform emotion with a subtlety that would later prove invaluable in managing courtship, marriage, and the rigid domestic hierarchy that awaited her. Childhood, therefore, was not merely a period of innocence, but a carefully orchestrated training ground for a future she did not author, a slow and steady molding of mind, body, and spirit to fit the expectations of a society that measured women not for their intellect or character, but for their ability to conform, please, and endure, setting the stage for a life in which beauty, obedience, and social grace would be both her currency and her prison. For a Victorian woman, courtship was rarely the tender exchange of affection that modern imagination might conjure. Instead, It was a carefully choreographed performance conducted under the watchful eyes of family and society, where every smile, glance, and word was scrutinized for its potential to secure a suitable match. Drawing rooms scented with the faint perfume of lavender and polished wood became stages on which young women acted out rehearsed manners, their emotions carefully regulated to project grace, charm, and modesty while concealing any hint of impatience, desire, or resentment that could compromise their prospects. Letters, often mediated or rewritten by mothers or governesses, were exercises in politeness and coded emotion, delicate instruments of social negotiation rather than heartfelt correspondence. A misstep could ruin months of carefully cultivated impressions. Eligible bachelors, meanwhile, were afforded freedoms unavailable to their female counterparts. Moving through this social labyrinth with a confidence born of societal privilege, selecting partners with an eye toward dowries, connections, and appearances rather than emotional compatibility, leaving the young women to navigate a world where their intrinsic worth was measured not by intellect or character, but by beauty, manners, and the size of their inheritance. Afternoon teas, garden promenades, and evening dances became arenas of silent competition, where subtle signals, an elongated curtsy, a lowered gaze, or a fleeting smile could determine whether a woman's future was secured in comfort or condemned to lonely obscurity. Families invested in the social and economic ramifications of each match, monitored interactions with meticulous care, coaching daughters on proper responses to compliments, correcting inflections in conversation, and reminding them to conceal ambition behind modesty, reinforcing the notion that personal desire was secondary to social duty. For many women, this period was both exhilarating and exhausting, as they internalized a constant tension between longing for genuine connection and the necessity of performing compliance, a delicate balancing act that could determine the trajectory of their entire lives. Emotional labor was relentless. Young women learned to conceal disappointment when rejected, suppressed curiosity or opinions deemed inappropriate, and cultivate an aura of sweetness and submissive intelligence that would attract the attention of suitable men. Yet, beneath the layers of etiquette and decorum, a quiet anxiety pervaded every gesture, every measured laugh. The fear of being overlooked or deemed unsuitable haunted the mind, shaping behavior in ways both subtle and profound. Courtship, in this sense, was less an intimate dialogue than a transactional negotiation, a marketplace of social value where marriage contracts were brokered, not with contracts on paper alone, but with gestures, appearances, and the careful orchestration of emotion. Even the rare moments of genuine attraction or joy were shadowed by the omnipresent awareness that failure to secure a match could consign a woman to spinsterhood, a life of social invisibility and quiet derision, reinforcing the unspoken but relentless truth that in Victorian society, a woman's freedom and security were inseparable from the performance of propriety, and her happiness often a secondary, negotiable commodity. In such a world, love was fragile, obedience compulsory, and the stakes existential, shaping a generation of women whose lives were meticulously scripted by society long before they ever exchanged vows, leaving them vulnerable to both societal judgment and personal regret. Behind the polished facades of Victorian households, where curtains swayed gently in the sun and the faint aroma of tea lingered in the parlors. Many wives endured a private torment that went unnoticed by the polite world outside: emotional neglect, controlling behavior, and, in too many homes, outright physical abuse, all concealed beneath the veneer of domestic perfection. A husband's word could carry the weight of law within the walls of the home, dictating routines, punishing perceived slights, and reminding the wife that her value depended entirely on obedience, decorum, and her capacity to endure. Social norms discouraged women from voicing dissatisfaction or seeking redress. Divorce was scandalous, costly, and difficult to obtain, leaving many trapped in marriages where their spirits were slowly eroded. Emotional abuse often manifested in subtle forms: a cutting remark about her appearance, a belittling comment regarding her intelligence, a calculated withdrawal of affection, all designed to remind the wife of her place in the domestic hierarchy and to reinforce dependence. In wealthier households, the rigid control could be executed with precision, as husbands demanded silence, proper posture, and the flawless management of the household, while servants quietly observed the tension, knowing intervention could result in dismissal or scandal. Physical abuse, though less openly acknowledged, was present in many homes, ranging from slaps and harsh grips to more severe punishment. But it was shrouded in secrecy, cloaked by societal expectations that marriage granted men authority over women. The wife's suffering was often invisible. Even her closest relatives might be unaware of the daily indignities. For social propriety demanded smiles in public and silence in private. The emotional toll was profound: chronic anxiety, depression, and a sense of isolation became common companions, and the woman learned to navigate her life with calculated caution, suppressing her natural reactions to fear, anger, or sorrow to preserve her household's reputation. In some cases, coping mechanisms emerged in quiet resilience, cultivating small pleasures such as needlework, reading forbidden novels, or writing in secret journals. Moments that provided an escape from relentless scrutiny but could never fully shield her from the pervasive stress of living under constant evaluation. Children became both witnesses and participants, often absorbing the tension and learning early that the home was a theater where appearances mattered more than truth, love, or well-being. Even visits from friends were fraught with careful calculation. Women learned to smile politely while concealing the bruises of mind or body, performing domestic contentment to satisfy social expectations. This culture of hidden suffering extended to the broader social sphere. Gossip, moral judgment, and the fear of scandal kept many women trapped, rendering their private anguish an unspoken truth, acknowledged only in whispered confidences or the silent tears shed in darkness. Thus, the home, ostensibly a sanctuary, became a cage of emotional discipline, where fear and expectation controlled movement, speech, and thought, and the wife's inner life was carefully concealed from the world, her dignity maintained only through the fragile performance of composure. In this suffocating environment, love and intimacy were often distorted by obligation and fear, turning a supposed partnership into a site of endurance, negotiation, and silent endurance, a testament to the harsh reality behind the idealized images of domestic life that society preferred to project. Even within the rigid structures of Victorian domestic life, Some wives found small, quiet ways to assert their agency, moments of rebellion that, while modest in scale, allowed them to claim a sliver of independence in a world designed to deny it. These acts were rarely dramatic. They took the form of subtle choices, like reading novels forbidden by social convention, writing private journals to preserve inner thoughts, or cultivating friendships with other women that offered emotional sustenance beyond the supervision of husbands or family. Some secretly pursued education, learning languages, sciences, or artistic skills without public acknowledgement, carefully hiding their knowledge as a shield against criticism. Others exercised control over small aspects of the household, arranging flowers, managing meals, or organizing charitable work, asserting influence in areas deemed socially acceptable, yet doing so with a precision and creativity that provided personal satisfaction and a sense of mastery. Even fashion could be a tool of rebellion, selecting slightly daring fabrics, hats, or accessories within the bounds of respectability allowed a woman to express identity and taste, claiming individuality while outwardly conforming to societal expectations. In certain households, wives negotiated limited freedoms with their husbands, convincing them to allow visits to friends, attendance at cultural events, or participation in charitable societies, effectively carving out small spaces where they could breathe outside the suffocating norms of domesticity. Travel, though uncommon, offered another rare avenue of escape, and some women who accompanied husbands on journeys or visited relatives in distant towns experienced fleeting glimpses of autonomy, freedom, and perspective beyond the parlor walls. Acts of resistance were also emotional, maintaining a private inner life, preserving opinions, and nurturing intellectual curiosity despite discouragement were rebellions in their own right, providing a sense of self-worth and identity that could not be entirely suppressed. In some cases, women formed covert support networks with other wives or female relatives, sharing advice, empathy, and emotional sustenance, a quiet rebellion against the isolation imposed by marriage. These small acts, however, were often precarious. Discovery could result in reprimand, social censure, or even restriction of privileges within the home. Yet, for many women, the existence of these tiny freedoms, moments of personal choice, intellectual engagement, or emotional expression, was enough to sustain them through the larger oppressions of daily life. They became a quiet testament to resilience, proving that even in the harshest constraints, human spirit seeks agency, connection, and meaning. Though the scale was small, these rebellions laid the groundwork for larger social transformations, inspiring the next generations of women to question, to learn, and to demand greater autonomy. They were acts of courage, often invisible to the world, yet monumental in the personal lives of the women who performed them. A hidden assertion that while Victorian society sought to define, limit, and control, individuality and selfhood could still survive, flickering quietly but persistently behind closed doors. In the end, these small rebellions remind us that even within suffocating systems of oppression, human creativity, intellect, and emotional strength find ways to persist, offering hope and humanity amid lives constrained by tradition, expectation, and societal rigor. From the first light of dawn, the life of a Victorian wife was orchestrated with meticulous precision, as if the entire household hinged upon her ability to execute routine flawlessly, transforming domestic labor into an unrelenting performance of perfection. Morning began with the sound of the bell or the rustle of curtains, signaling the start of tasks that demanded both efficiency and decorum. She rose, dressed in layers of corsets, petticoats, and stiff bodices, arranged her hair according to social fashion, and ensured her appearance projected composure and refinement. For even the smallest disheveled detail could reflect poorly upon the household. Breakfast was a complex choreography, requiring attention to the nutritional needs, preferences, and moods of the family, while simultaneously supervising servants to guarantee that each tray, cup, and plate met unspoken standards of presentation. Beyond feeding the household, she inspected linens, dusted furniture, arranged flowers, and ensured the rooms reflected order, cleanliness, and propriety, all while maintaining a polite demeanor that masked fatigue, irritation, or frustration. Every action carried implicit judgment from both family and visitors. The flawless execution of domesticity was more than a duty. Even minor lapses, a misplaced fork, a stain on a tablecloth, or a misaligned curtain could be perceived as a reflection of moral or personal failing, compounding the emotional weight of perfection that Victorian society imposed on women. Amid these tasks, she was expected to remain accessible and gracious, ready to receive guests at a moment's notice, respond to letters with polished civility, and attend to the spiritual and emotional needs of her family. Personal desires, comfort, or rest, or luxuries rarely afforded, often sacrificed to the relentless demands of running a household that functioned not only as a home, but also as a display of status, propriety, and social credibility. The rigidity of this routine created an invisible cage in which movement, speech, and even thought were subtly disciplined by the dual pressures of societal expectation and internalized perfectionism. Though some wives derived satisfaction from skillfully managing these tasks, others experienced the slow accumulation of exhaustion and frustration, a tension that left little space for self-expression or emotional relief. As the day progressed, this cycle repeated with merciless regularity, transforming ordinary chores into high-stakes exercises in control and presentation, and ensuring that even moments of supposed leisure were tinged with vigilance and responsibility. The domestic sphere, outwardly serene and orderly, was in truth a site of ceaseless labor, mental calculation, and emotional endurance, where the Victorian wife balanced the visible and invisible weight of expectation, striving to maintain the illusion of ease while her body and spirit bore the hidden strain of perfection. In such an environment, the home was both sanctuary and prison, a space where accomplishment could be displayed proudly, yet every achievement was shadowed by the persistent knowledge that failure, however small, could provoke social criticism, personal guilt, or a sense of inadequacy that lingered long after the day's work was done. Though Victorian wives were bound by societal expectation to maintain strict obedience and decorum, within the walls of their homes they wielded a subtle, often invisible form of authority over the household, a power that came not from law or social recognition, but from the careful orchestration of labor, order, and routine. Managing servants was itself a delicate art, requiring both vigilance and diplomacy. The housekeeper, cook, maids, and governesses all depended on her direction. Yet any overt display of harshness could be seen as unladylike, while too much leniency could result in disorder that reflected poorly on her competence. Every day demanded an intricate mental inventory: who had cleaned which room, whether the pantry and larders were fully stocked, if linens were spotless, and whether the children were properly dressed, educated, and behaving according to social expectation. Tasks were performed with relentless attention to detail, often while simultaneously entertaining guests, responding to letters, or preparing meals, creating a continuous mental strain that left little room for personal reflection or leisure. The emotional labor involved was immense. She was expected to remain calm, courteous, and poised regardless of the chaos behind the scenes, masking frustration or fatigue with a smile, knowing that the appearance of composure was as important as the actual completion of household duties. Children and family members, while the recipients of her care, were also extensions of her labor and reputation. Their manners, achievements, and even health were reflections of her diligence, adding layers of responsibility that were invisible to the outside world but intensely felt in private. The complexity of her role required not only technical skill but psychological insight, as she negotiated between the demands of the servants, the whims of her husband, and the expectations of society, often acting as a mediator, disciplinarian, and emotional buffer simultaneously. Even small miscalculations, poorly timed task, a forgotten detail, or a misread instruction could ripple through the household, creating tensions or disruptions that required immediate attention, reinforcing the sense that she was constantly on duty, never truly able to rest. In addition, she bore the burden of maintaining appearances beyond functionality. Rooms were expected not only to be clean, but aesthetically harmonious. Meals not only nourishing, but beautifully presented, and social events perfectly executed, all while concealing the often grueling labor that made them possible. The unrecognized authority of the Victorian wife thus existed in tension. With her lack of formal power, she controlled the rhythms of daily life. Yet any attempt to assert independence beyond domestic management risked criticism or censure. This duality, simultaneous control and constraint, created a psychological landscape of constant vigilance, where the satisfaction of competence was intertwined with exhaustion, and mastery of household systems coexisted with the subtle oppression of societal expectation. Invisible labor became a defining feature of her existence. The countless small acts of management, persuasion, and oversight that ensured the smooth functioning of the home were both her domain and her invisible burden, shaping daily life in ways rarely acknowledged outside her walls. Within this iron cage of domestic authority, Victorian wives exercised ingenuity, discipline, and patience, their mastery of household logistics forming the backbone of family life. Yet the mental and emotional strain remained largely unseen, unappreciated, and relentless, a silent testament to the endurance required to sustain both the household and the appearance of effortless domestic perfection. For a Victorian wife, the preparation and presentation of meals extended far beyond nourishment. It was a performance of social standing, etiquette, and domestic mastery. demanding both physical labor and mental calculation in every detail of timing, arrangement, and propriety. Breakfast, luncheon, tea, and dinner each followed strict conventions. The selection of foods reflected status. The placement of cutlery adhered to precise rules. And even the pacing of service was choreographed to reflect grace and order, leaving the wife responsible for maintaining an atmosphere that appeared effortless while concealing the meticulous planning and exertion behind it. Every guest or family member's preference had to be anticipated, accommodating dietary restrictions, personal tastes, and sensitivities, all while ensuring that no misstep could reflect poorly on her skill or judgment. Meals became arenas of social performance, where manners were reinforced through quiet correction and subtle guidance. As children were monitored for proper posture, polite conversation, and the avoidance of mess, and servants were directed to maintain seamless service. Beyond the table itself, the act of entertaining was governed by strict social codes, seating arrangements, choice of conversation topics, and even the timing of toasts or courses required careful planning, transforming the domestic sphere into a stage where the wife's ability to orchestrate harmony was constantly on display. Emotional labor intertwined with practical labor. She had to remain cheerful, gracious, and composed regardless of exhaustion, the misbehavior of children, or the incompetence of staff, projecting an aura of serenity that belied the ceaseless exertion involved in sustaining appearances. Every meal also carried the invisible weight of societal judgment. Neighbors, relatives, and visiting acquaintances could infer her diligence, morality, and family competence from the quality of service and the elegance of presentation, making each culinary endeavor a test of both skill and reputation. Failure to maintain standards could result in social embarrassment or subtle criticism, reinforcing the anxiety that underpinned daily life and the relentless pressure to achieve perfection. Even the moments that might have offered relaxation, such as a quiet lunch or family tea, were shaped by obligation and performance, leaving little space for genuine rest or personal expression. The complexity extended to the invisible logistics of supply and preparation, ensuring freshness of ingredients, planning menus that balanced nutrition with seasonality and aesthetics, and coordinating servants' schedules required constant attention, strategic foresight, and organizational skill. In many ways, the domestic table became a microcosm of Victorian society itself, where hierarchy, propriety, and discipline intersected, and where the wife's ability to control appearances masked the physical and mental toll exacted by the expectations of social performance. Through this daily ritual of cooking, serving, and supervising, she exercised authority, creativity, and ingenuity. Yet each act was inseparable from the broader framework of constraint that defined her existence. Mastery within limitation, control tempered by subjugation, competence shadowed by societal pressure. In the polished surfaces of silver, the crisp folds of napkins, and the measured cadence of conversation, the tireless labor of a Victorian wife became visible only in the illusion of effortless perfection. A cinematic display of diligence and grace that concealed the relentless labor, emotional strain, and quiet endurance underpinning every meal and every social encounter within the domestic sphere. Beyond daily routines, The life of a Victorian wife was dominated by a ceaseless cycle of social obligations and household ceremonies, each a test of decorum, precision, and endurance, reinforcing her role as the guarantor of family reputation and social propriety. Invitations to tea, dinner parties, and soirees arrived with unspoken expectations. Every interaction was an opportunity to display elegance, taste, and poise, while every error or lapse could ripple outward as subtle scandal, gossip, or judgment. Preparation for such events demanded hours of labor and forethought, from the careful selection and arrangement of table settings, linens, and floral displays, to the coordination of menus and timing, to the meticulous supervision of servants who executed the wife's instructions with silent obedience. In parallel, the wife ensured that family members presented themselves with similar precision. Children's clothes had to be spotless, hair perfectly arranged, and manners impeccably rehearsed. The husband, though enjoying social latitude, required her subtle guidance in conversation and hosting etiquette, with missteps sometimes quietly corrected in ways that preserved his dignity while protecting the household's reputation. Household ceremonies also included religious observances, birthdays, anniversaries, and other domestic milestones, each bound by ritualized expectations that reinforced hierarchy, discipline, and decorum, transforming simple family events into performances of moral and social virtue. Emotional labor was omnipresent. The wife masked fatigue, irritation, or private dissatisfaction behind a smile or a measured gesture, aware that every expression was scrutinized and potentially interpreted as a reflection of her competence or moral character. Even seemingly trivial tasks, folding napkins with precise symmetry, polishing candlesticks, or arranging seating according to social precedent, carried symbolic weight, signaling attention to detail, refinement, and adherence to societal norms. Failure to maintain these appearances could invite criticism, real or imagined, leaving her hyper-aware of the social gaze and the stakes involved in every domestic decision. The preparation and execution of social obligations became a form of invisible labor, as every choice, adjustment, and correction required foresight, patience, and strategic thinking, often exhausting both mind and body while remaining largely unrecognized outside the household. Despite the constraints, some wives found subtle ways to inject creativity, personal taste, and satisfaction into these ceremonies, whether in the choice of floral arrangements, the arrangement of lighting, or the curation of conversation topics, claiming small victories in a life otherwise tightly governed by expectation. In effect, Victorian domestic ceremonies transformed the home into both stage and arena, where mastery of presentation, control over labor, and emotional resilience were the measures of success, and where the pressure to project perfection never ceased. Through these rituals, the wife became simultaneously director, performer, and audience of her own constrained existence, exercising authority in invisible ways while remaining trapped within the iron cage of societal norms. Every polished surface, precisely folded napkin, and carefully timed toast reflected a life lived in perpetual service to appearances, a cinematic tableau of discipline, endurance, and emotional labor, where the weight of expectation was as tangible as the furniture she polished and the flowers she arranged. In these domestic ceremonies, the Victorian wife's identity, skill, and survival were tested constantly, revealing the stark intersection of societal power, personal sacrifice, and the quiet heroism embedded in daily acts of meticulous care. As dusk fell over Victorian households, bringing a temporary respite from the relentless demands of domestic life, the evening offered wives a rare moment of solitude, reflection, and quiet endurance. Though even this period was rarely free from the burdens of expectation and responsibility. After overseeing the final preparations for dinner, ensuring that the household remained orderly, and supervising children's studies or bedtime routines, the wife often retreated to her private quarters, a small sanctuary where the day's labor could finally be processed in isolation. Yet, even in these moments, her mind was seldom at rest. The tasks of the household, the scrutiny of family and society, and the pressures of maintaining appearances lingered, weighing on her consciousness like a persistent shadow. Many turned to reading, writing, or embroidery activities, socially sanctioned, yet deeply personal, to cultivate a sense of selfhood, intellectual engagement, or creative satisfaction. Though these pursuits were often modestly hidden from the more public eye, lest they appear frivolous or self-indulgent, journals became confidants, where wives could articulate feelings of fatigue, frustration, or quiet despair, recording thoughts that might never be shared, offering a semblance of agency in a life otherwise governed by external expectations. In wealthier households, the evening might include reading aloud, musical performance, or discussions with children, all carefully structured and monitored. Yet even these activities demanded the maintenance of composure, grace, and patience, leaving little room for spontaneous emotion or unrestrained expression. Solitude was thus both a relief and a continuation of labor, as the mental, emotional, and social demands of the day followed her into private spaces, requiring constant vigilance and careful navigation of internalized norms. Some women found subtle ways to stretch the boundaries of their evening hours, lingering over a favorite novel, sketching scenes inspired by travel or imagination, or privately corresponding with sympathetic friends or relatives. All acts that provided small, precious affirmations of individuality and intellect. Yet the overarching sense of confinement never fully dissipated. The home, even in its quietest hours, remained a structure of control, reflection, and societal expectation, reminding the wife that her identity and value were measured by her ability to manage labor, maintain appearances, and conform to the dictates of propriety. In these evening hours, the interplay of fatigue, reflection, and quiet resilience shaped the inner life of the Victorian wife, forging a delicate equilibrium between endurance and self-preservation, compliance and subtle assertion of selfhood. Even when physically still, her mind traced the contours of the day, the minor victories of successful meals, harmonious social interactions, and well-managed households, blending with the quiet despair of restricted freedom, unfulfilled ambition, and emotional labor that went unrecognized. The private sphere, though ostensibly a retreat, was thus simultaneously restorative and oppressive, offering both a momentary haven and a stark reminder of the iron cage in which she lived. By candlelight or the soft glow of a fireplace, the Victorian wife navigated these dualities, with quiet determination, cultivating patience, reflection, and resilience. Preserving a sense of identity in the spaces society allowed her to claim, and demonstrating that even in a life dominated by external control, the human spirit found avenues, however narrow, for endurance, contemplation, and self-preservation. Beneath the prim curtains, polished floors, and carefully curated parlors of Victorian homes, many wives endured a quiet, almost invisible torment, a combination of emotional manipulation, verbal cruelty, and, in far too many cases, physical abuse, all cloaked beneath the veneer of domestic propriety and social respectability. Husbands, empowered by law, tradition, and social expectation, often exercised unchecked authority within the household, using criticism, withdrawal of affection, or direct physical punishment to assert dominance and reinforce the subservience of their wives. A raised voice, a scornful glance, or a sharp remark about her inadequacies, whether real or imagined, could undermine her confidence, leaving emotional bruises that were invisible to outsiders but deeply felt within the confined walls of the home. Physical abuse, though less openly acknowledged due to social taboo, ranged from harsh grips, slaps, or beatings to more sustained violence. Yet the wife was generally powerless to seek recourse. Divorce was socially scandalous, legally difficult, and financially ruinous, making endurance a necessity rather than a choice. Even in the absence of physical harm, the emotional labor of survival was immense. Women were required to maintain composure, fulfill household duties, manage children's education and manners, and oversee servants, all while suppressing fear, resentment, or despair, presenting a facade of serenity that concealed a reality of oppression. Guests, neighbors, and even extended family often perceived only a flawless domestic environment, unaware of the tension, quiet fear, and subjugation that underpinned it, and in many cases, social etiquette demanded that the wife accept her situation silently, lest she invite judgment or pity. Isolation exacerbated suffering. Servants were sometimes complicit or powerless. Children absorbed the household tension, and society offered few mechanisms of support or protection, leaving the wife trapped in a cycle of control, endurance, and invisible labor. Some women developed coping strategies, journaling in secret, cultivating hidden friendships, or finding solace in religion or literature, but these measures were limited, private, and offered only partial relief from the constant strain of domestic oppression. The psychological effects were profound. Anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of inadequacy or fear became common companions, shaping the wife's inner life and her perception of the world. Even the act of performing daily routines, meals, cleaning, childcare was shadowed by an awareness that any perceived mistake could provoke criticism or punishment, heightening vigilance and self-monitoring to an exhausting degree. In this environment, marriage was transformed from a partnership into a site of endurance and survival, where love, respect, and equality were often absent, replaced by hierarchy, control, and expectation. The contrast between the polished, seemingly tranquil exterior of the household and the turmoil within emphasized the duplicity inherent in Victorian domestic ideals. Perfection and propriety were valued above well-being, appearances above truth, and social conformity above personal dignity. Quiet resilience became a form of survival, a fragile lifeline in a world that systematically denied autonomy, support, and recognition, forcing women to navigate each day with courage, subtlety, and a vigilance born from necessity. Within these walls, suffering was both intimate and invisible, shaping a generation of women whose private lives were fraught with fear, endurance, and the unspoken, relentless labor of emotional survival. The weight of constant scrutiny, unrelenting expectations, and the often hidden cruelty within the Victorian household created a profound emotional strain for wives, manifesting in isolation, chronic anxiety, and depression that were rarely acknowledged or treated in a society that equated female suffering with weakness or moral failure. The private nature of emotional abuse meant that wives often endured silent torment alone, unable to confide in friends or family for fear of gossip, judgment, or loss of reputation, while even children, though loved, sometimes became unwitting witnesses to tension and subtle cruelty, reinforcing the wife's sense of entrapment. Anxiety was a constant companion. The anticipation of criticism from a husband, the possibility of social embarrassment, or the subtle failures of household management could trigger relentless self-monitoring and emotional hypervigilance, leaving little room for relaxation or genuine self-expression. Depression often followed the pattern of isolation, compounded by a lack of autonomy and the inability to control fundamental aspects of her life: property, finances, personal decisions, and social mobility were largely out of reach, leaving women trapped in a cycle of dependence and despair. Even small daily victories, a orderly room, a well-prepared meal, polite children could be overshadowed by the relentless pressure to maintain perfection, ensuring that emotional relief was fleeting, precarious, and never fully restorative. Religious devotion, reading, or secret journaling sometimes offered solace, but these acts of self-preservation could not replace the validation, affection, or freedom that the household denied, and the wife's inner life became a delicate balancing act of hope and suppression. The mental labor of endurance was compounded by social norms that discouraged complaint or resistance. The notion of a proper wife demanded patience, cheerfulness, and obedience, and any deviation was construed as moral or personal failure, intensifying feelings of guilt, shame, and inadequacy. Sleep itself could be restless, invaded by memories of conflict, imagined transgressions, or fears of social exposure, creating a cycle in which fatigue exacerbated emotional fragility and reduced the capacity for resilience. Even outward appearances, smiles, polite conversation, and careful adherence to etiquette required tremendous emotional effort, as the wife constantly managed impressions while concealing inner turmoil. Over time, the accumulation of stress, unacknowledged grief, and emotional suppression shaped both behavior and self-perception. Many women internalized blame for their suffering, believing they were naturally deficient, incapable, or deserving of hardship. A psychological captivity as constraining as any physical limitation. The interplay of anxiety, depression, and social isolation produced invisible wounds that often lasted a lifetime, shaping a generation of Victorian wives whose brilliance, intelligence, and emotional depth were channeled almost entirely into endurance, concealment, and the management of appearances. In this silent suffering, resilience and despair coexisted, a testament to the human capacity to survive, even when emotional nourishment, recognition, and autonomy were systematically denied. Life became an unending exercise in emotional labor, a performance in which the stakes were survival and dignity, and the cost was the erosion of selfhood, freedom, and the quiet, unspoken parts of the soul that could never be entirely surrendered to the demands of a rigid, oppressive domestic world. As dusk fell over Victorian households, bringing a temporary respite from the relentless demands of domestic life, the evening offered wives a rare moment of solitude, reflection, and quiet endurance. Though even this period was rarely free from the burdens of expectation and responsibility. After overseeing the final preparations for dinner, ensuring that the household remained orderly, and supervising children's studies or bedtime routines, the wife often retreated to her private quarters, a small sanctuary where the day's labor could finally be processed in isolation. Yet even in these moments, her mind was seldom at rest. The tasks of the household, the scrutiny of family and society, and the pressures of maintaining appearances lingered, weighing on her consciousness like a persistent shadow. Many turned to reading, writing, or embroidery activities, socially sanctioned, yet deeply personal, to cultivate a sense of selfhood, intellectual engagement, or creative satisfaction. Though these pursuits were often modestly hidden from the more public eye, lest they appear frivolous or self-indulgent, journals became confidants, where wives could articulate feelings of fatigue, frustration, or quiet despair, recording thoughts that might never be shared, offering a semblance of agency in a life otherwise governed by external expectations. In wealthier households, the evening might include reading aloud, musical performance, or discussions with children, all carefully structured and monitored. Yet, even these activities demanded the maintenance of composure, grace, and patience, leaving little room for spontaneous emotion or unrestrained expression. Solitude was thus both a relief and a continuation of labor, as the mental, emotional, and social demands of the day followed her into private spaces, requiring constant vigilance and careful navigation of internalized norms. Some women found subtle ways to stretch the boundaries of their evening hours, lingering over a favorite novel, sketching scenes inspired by travel or imagination, or privately corresponding with sympathetic friends or relatives. All acts that provided small, precious affirmations of individuality and intellect. Yet the overarching sense of confinement never fully dissipated. The home, even in its quietest hours, remained a structure of control, reflection, and societal expectation, reminding the wife that her identity and value were measured by her ability to manage labor, maintain appearances, and conform to the dictates of propriety. In these evening hours, the interplay of fatigue, reflection, and quiet resilience shaped the inner life of the Victorian wife, forging a delicate equilibrium between endurance and self-preservation, compliance and subtle assertion of selfhood. Even when physically still, her mind traced the contours of the day, the minor victories of successful meals, harmonious social interactions, and well-managed households, blending with the quiet despair of restricted freedom, unfulfilled ambition, and emotional labor that went unrecognized. The private sphere, though ostensibly a retreat, was thus simultaneously restorative and oppressive, offering both a momentary haven and a stark reminder of the iron cage in which she lived. By candlelight, or the soft glow of a fireplace, the Victorian wife navigated these dualities with quiet determination, cultivating patience, reflection, and resilience, preserving a sense of identity in the spaces society allowed her to claim, and demonstrating that even in a life dominated by external control, the human spirit found avenues, however narrow, for endurance, contemplation, and self-preservation. Beneath the prim curtains, polished floors, and carefully curated parlors of Victorian homes, many wives endured a quiet, almost invisible torment, a combination of emotional manipulation, verbal cruelty, and, in far too many cases, physical abuse, all cloaked beneath the veneer of domestic propriety. Husbands, empowered by law, tradition, and social expectation, often exercised unchecked authority within the household, using criticism, withdrawal of affection, or direct physical punishment to assert dominance and reinforce the subservience of their wives. A raised voice, a scornful glance, or a sharp remark about her inadequacies, whether real or imagined, could undermine her confidence, leaving emotional bruises that were invisible to outsiders but deeply felt within the confined walls of the home. Physical abuse, though less openly acknowledged due to social taboo, ranged from harsh grips, slaps, or beatings to more sustained violence. Yet the wife was generally powerless to seek recourse. Divorce was socially scandalous, legally difficult, and financially ruinous, making endurance a necessity rather than a choice. Even in the absence of physical harm, the emotional labor of survival was immense. Women were required to maintain composure, fulfill household duties, manage children's education and manners, and oversee servants, all while suppressing fear, resentment, or despair, presenting a facade of serenity that concealed a reality of oppression. Guests, neighbors, and even extended family often perceived only a flawless domestic environment, unaware of the tension, quiet fear, and subjugation that underpinned it. And in many cases, social etiquette demanded that the wife accept her situation silently, lest she invite judgment or pity. Isolation exacerbated suffering. Servants were sometimes complicit or powerless. Children absorbed the household tension, and society offered few mechanisms of support or protection, leaving the wife trapped in a cycle of control, endurance, and invisible labor. Some women developed coping strategies, journaling in secret, cultivating hidden friendships, or finding solace in religion or literature, but these measures were limited, private, and offered only partial relief from the constant strain of domestic oppression. The psychological effects were profound. Anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of inadequacy or fear became common companions, shaping the wife's inner life and her perception of the world. Even the act of performing daily routines, meals, cleaning, childcare was shadowed by an awareness that any perceived mistake could provoke criticism or punishment, heightening vigilance and self-monitoring to an exhausting degree. In this environment, marriage was transformed from a partnership into a site of endurance and survival, where love, respect, and equality were often absent, replaced by hierarchy, control, and expectation. The contrast between the polished, seemingly tranquil exterior of the household and the turmoil within emphasized the duplicity inherent in Victorian. Domestic ideals, perfection and propriety were valued above well-being, appearances above truth, and social conformity above personal dignity. Quiet resilience became a form of survival, a fragile lifeline in a world that systematically denied autonomy, support, and recognition, forcing women to navigate each day with courage, subtlety, and a vigilance born from necessity. Within these walls, suffering was both intimate and invisible, shaping a generation of women whose private lives were fraught with fear, endurance, and the unspoken, relentless labor of emotional survival. The weight of constant scrutiny, unrelenting expectations, and the often hidden cruelty within the Victorian household created a profound emotional strain for wives, manifesting in isolation, chronic anxiety, and depression that were rarely acknowledged or treated in a society that equated female suffering with weakness or moral failure. The private nature of emotional abuse meant that wives often endured silent torment alone, unable to confide in friends or family for fear of gossip, judgment, or loss of reputation, while even children, though loved, sometimes became unwitting witnesses to tension and subtle cruelty, reinforcing the wife's sense of entrapment. Anxiety was a constant companion. The anticipation of criticism from a husband, the possibility of social embarrassment, or the subtle failures of household management could trigger relentless self-monitoring and emotional hypervigilance, leaving little room for relaxation or genuine self-expression. Depression often followed the pattern of isolation, compounded by a lack of autonomy and the inability to control fundamental aspects of her life: property, finances, personal decisions, and social mobility were largely out of reach, leaving women trapped in a cycle of dependence and despair. Even small daily victories, an orderly room, a well-prepared meal, polite children could be overshadowed by the relentless pressure to maintain perfection, ensuring that emotional relief was fleeting, precarious, and never fully restorative. Religious devotion, reading, or secret journaling sometimes offered solace, but these acts of self-preservation could not replace the validation, affection, or freedom that the household denied, and the wife's inner life became a delicate balancing act of hope and suppression. The mental labor of endurance was compounded by social norms that discouraged complaint or resistance. The notion of a proper wife demanded patience, cheerfulness, and obedience, and any deviation was construed as moral or personal failure, intensifying feelings of guilt, shame, and inadequacy. Sleep itself could be restless, invaded by memories of conflict, imagined transgressions, or fears of social exposure, creating a cycle in which fatigue exacerbated emotional fragility and reduced the capacity for resilience. Even outward appearances, smiles, polite conversation, and careful adherence to etiquette, tremendous emotional effort, as the wife constantly managed impressions while concealing inner turmoil. Over time, the accumulation of stress, unacknowledged grief, and emotional suppression shaped both behavior and self-perception. Many women internalized blame for their suffering, believing they were naturally deficient, incapable, or deserving of hardship, a psychological captivity as constraining as any physical limitation. The interplay of anxiety, depression, and social isolation produced invisible wounds that often lasted a lifetime, shaping a generation of Victorian wives whose brilliance, intelligence, and emotional depth were channeled almost entirely into endurance, concealment, and the management of appearances. In this silent suffering, resilience and despair coexisted, a testament to the human capacity to survive even when emotional nourishment, recognition, and autonomy were systematically denied. Life became an unending exercise in emotional labor, a performance in which the stakes were survival and dignity, and the cost was the erosion of selfhood, freedom, and the quiet, unspoken parts of the soul that could never be entirely surrendered to the demands of a rigid, oppressive domestic world. Within the ostensibly serene walls of Victorian homes, physical control over wives existed as an extension of social and marital hierarchies, where coercion, subtle punishment, and occasional overt physical discipline reinforced the notion that women were property to be guided, corrected, or restrained, all under the guise of maintaining order and propriety. Even in households where outright violence was rare, subtle methods of bodily control were pervasive. Husbands dictated dress, posture, and movement, regulating every aspect of appearance and behavior to reflect the household's status, while the threat of physical reprimands lapse, or a stern grip on the arm loomed as a reminder of the consequences of perceived disobedience. In more severe situations, wives were subject to actual physical punishment, though such acts were rarely discussed outside the home, concealed by social expectation and the stigma attached to airing domestic grievances, leaving women vulnerable and voiceless. Beyond the immediate pain of punishment, the psychological impact was profound. Women internalized fear and submission, learning to preemptively curtail actions, words, and even thoughts that might provoke disapproval, effectively training their bodies and minds to conform to an oppressive ideal. Daily routines reinforced this control, from strict adherence to dress codes and household management, standards to obedience in social interactions and the supervision of children, creating a constant tension between autonomy and enforcement. The body itself became a site of regulation. Corsets and restrictive clothing constrained movement, posture, and comfort, reinforcing both societal ideals of feminine beauty and the physical subjugation of women. While fatigued from labor and enforced stillness compounded the sense of restriction. In households with servants, women also managed the coordination of others' labor, often mediating conflicts or correcting errors. Yet any mismanagement reflected upon her competence, producing additional stress and vigilance over physical spaces and movements. The intertwining of social, emotional, and bodily control meant that compliance was rarely optional. Obedience was cultivated through a combination of fear, expectation, and internalized norms, making resistance difficult, dangerous, or socially isolating. Even private moments were not entirely free. Decisions about personal time, travel, or intellectual pursuit were constrained by both the husband's authority and the invisible presence of societal judgment, reinforcing the sense that every bodily choice carried moral or social significance. In this environment, physical endurance became inseparable from emotional resilience. The wife learned to navigate pain, restriction, and discomfort with grace, concealing any sign of weakness or rebellion to maintain dignity and social acceptability. These dynamics, subtle or overt, transformed the domestic sphere into a theater of controlled bodies and disciplined behavior, where mastery of composure masked suffering, and the lines between care, control, and coercion blurred. Over time, the cumulative effects of such physical regulation and forced stillness, strict posture, controlled movement, and occasional punishment shaped not only the body but the psyche, producing women who were both extraordinarily resilient and profoundly constrained, capable of executing complex domestic and social duties while enduring an invisible, persistent regime of bodily discipline. The quiet suffering embedded in these practices reveals the harsh realities behind the polished images of Victorian domestic life, emphasizing that beneath every well-kept household and polite facade lay the coercive forces that defined, restricted, and silently oppressed women's lives. The suffering of Victorian wives was reinforced not only within the home, but also by the legal and social systems that rendered them largely powerless, creating an invisible chain that bound them to obedience, endurance, and often silent abuse. Under coverture laws, a married woman's property, earnings, and legal rights were subsumed under her husband's authority, effectively erasing her autonomy and leaving her with little recourse in cases of neglect, financial control, or domestic violence. Divorce, while technically possible, was prohibitively expensive, socially stigmatized, and legally complex, ensuring that many women remained trapped in marriages that were emotionally or physically harmful, with societal opinion often framing them as failures for seeking separation rather than victims of abuse. Even outside the courtroom, social norms enforced compliance and submission. Polite society demanded that women maintain appearances, uphold family reputation, and endure marital difficulties quietly, while neighbors, clergy, and relatives rarely intervened, believing that private domestic matters were beyond scrutiny or interference. This combination of legal incapacity and social expectation created a form of structural oppression, where the wife's suffering was normalized and her endurance valorized, reinforcing internalized guilt and self-blame. The threat of scandal served as an additional form of control. To speak openly about abuse could lead to ostracization, financial insecurity, and moral condemnation, deterring women from seeking help and compelling them to maintain the illusion of domestic harmony even when reality was far from it. In wealthier households, the stakes were compounded by social visibility. Maintaining a flawless facade was paramount, and failure to adhere to societal expectations could tarnish not only the woman's reputation, but also her family's status, leaving her further constrained by pride, duty, and fear. Education, employment, and personal networks offered limited avenues of escape, as women were discouraged or outright prohibited from pursuing intellectual or professional independence, leaving emotional endurance as the primary tool for survival. Even charitable work, religious devotion, or private hobbies were framed as extensions of domestic obligation rather than genuine personal fulfillment, subtly reinforcing dependence and limiting avenues for empowerment. Over time, the convergence of legal subjugation, social pressure, and moral expectations created a psychological cage. Women internalized the idea that endurance was a virtue, silence a necessity, and autonomy an impossible aspiration, cultivating resilience alongside quiet despair. The invisible chains of Victorian society ensured that abuse, physical or financial, was both structurally enabled and socially sanctioned, shaping the daily lives and inner worlds of countless wives. Yet, within these constraints, many women developed subtle strategies of survival, cultivating private, intellectual, or creative pursuits, forming discreet support networks with other women, and negotiating small freedoms within the household, asserting agency in the narrow spaces that remained legally and socially permissible. These acts of quiet defiance were essential to preserving identity and dignity in a world that sought to define them entirely by their compliance and capacity for endurance, illustrating that even under the harshest structural oppression, the human spirit found ways to navigate, resist, and survive. For Victorian women, marriage was less a romantic union than an economic imperative, a social contract in which personal desire was subordinate to financial security, family expectation, and societal approval, and failure to marry or to secure a suitably advantageous match could result in destitution, social marginalization, or lifelong dependence on relatives. From adolescence, girls were taught that their primary goal was to secure a husband capable of providing wealth, status, and stability, while cultivating a demeanor of charm, propriety, and compliance that would appeal to eligible men and their families. Dowries, inheritances, and family connections became critical factors in this system, transforming marriage into a negotiation of property, prestige, and social leverage, rather than an intimate emotional bond. Families monitored and orchestrated courtships with meticulous care. Mothers coached daughters on conversation, posture, and appearance. Letters were often mediated or carefully edited, and social events such as teas, balls, and garden parties were stages upon which young women performed the ideal blend of innocence, grace, and attractiveness. The consequences of failure were stark. Unmarried women, particularly those from middle-class or upper-class families, risked financial insecurity, social invisibility, and the stigma of spinsterhood, a label that reduced their value in both economic and emotional terms. Even marriage did not guarantee freedom or happiness. A union with a wealthy but controlling husband could secure social status while imposing intense domestic and emotional labor, effectively exchanging one form of constraint for another. Financial dependence created a power imbalance in which women had little recourse if mistreated. Property and income belonged legally to husbands under coverture laws, making women vulnerable to economic coercion, control, and abuse. Decisions about household management, social engagement, and even personal movement were often constrained by a husband's preferences, meaning that the financial security provided by marriage came with invisible chains of authority. The pressure to marry and to do so well extended beyond family to society at large, where neighbors, acquaintances, and extended networks monitored engagements, weddings, and domestic arrangements, often judging a woman's worth by her husband's wealth, status, and influence. Even subtle missteps in etiquette or appearance could threaten a woman's prospects, creating a persistent anxiety that permeated daily life, shaping both behavior and self-perception. In this environment, courtship, negotiation, and eventual matrimony were exercises in performance, endurance, and strategic thinking, as women balanced personal desires with societal demand, family expectations, and economic necessity. Some attempted to exercise choice within this framework, cultivating intellect, charm, and social skill to improve their prospects. Yet the fundamental constraints remain. Financial security was inseparable from marital dependence, and personal autonomy was often sacrificed in exchange for stability. The pervasive focus on marriage as an economic and social necessity also reinforced the broader culture of domestic constraint, ensuring that women remained enmeshed in roles defined by obedience, service, and appearance rather than personal fulfillment or professional achievement. In essence, Victorian marriage was both a safety net and a trap. It offered protection from poverty and social marginalization while simultaneously enforcing a lifetime of dependency, labor, and subservience. This duality security, entwined with constraint, shaped the lives, choices, and inner worlds of countless women, forcing them to navigate a delicate, often painful balance between survival, social expectation, and the longing for personal agency and emotional fulfillment. For many, the pursuit of financial security through marriage was not a matter of preference, but necessity, a strategic imperative that dictated the trajectory of their lives and underscored the harsh realities of gender, class, and societal power in Victorian England. For Victorian women, family expectations were a powerful force shaping their choices, behaviors, and futures, often overriding personal desires in favor of duty, propriety, and social ambition, transforming domestic life into a complex web of obligation, surveillance, and subtle coercion. From an early age, girls were educated to understand that their value was measured not only by appearance and accomplishments, but by their ability to serve family interests. Whether through advantageous marriages, maintenance of household standards, or support of siblings' ambitions, mothers, aunts, and extended female relatives often served as enforcers of these expectations, coaching young women in etiquette, deportment, and the careful balancing of charm, modesty, and intelligence to ensure compliance with social norms and family strategy. The pressure extended to every aspect of daily life: dress, manners, social interactions, and even conversation topics were scrutinized, corrected, and monitored, cultivating a constant self-awareness that left little room for spontaneous expression or deviation. Letters, invitations, and social correspondence were frequently guided or supervised, ensuring that interactions with potential suitors or influential acquaintances reflected the family's priorities and maintained the household's reputation. Failure to meet these expectations could invite subtle reprimand, gossip, or even shame, reinforcing the belief that individual desires were secondary to collective family ambition. This system of surveillance created both internalized discipline and emotional tension, as women learned to anticipate family approval or disapproval in virtually every decision, cultivating a careful, measured persona that concealed private thought, longing, or rebellion. In middle and upper-class families, the stakes were particularly high. Marriages were transactions of wealth, social status, and influence, and even minor missteps in etiquette, dress, or conversation could jeopardize a daughter's prospects, reflecting not only on her own value, but on the honor and strategic position of her entire family. Younger sisters often watched the successes or failures of older siblings, internalizing lessons about ambition, caution, and the delicate negotiation of desire versus duty. Emotional labor became constant. The wife in training had to maintain poise, charm, and patience while navigating family expectations, subtly manipulating impressions to preserve dignity and appeal, all without overtly challenging authority. While some families fostered genuine affection and guidance, even these relationships were entwined with duty and expectation, blurring the line between care and control. The pressure to conform extended beyond courtship to broader life choices, education, travel, charitable work, and social participation were often guided by what was deemed appropriate or advantageous by the family, leaving women to negotiate personal fulfillment within a tightly circumscribed framework. Over time, internalized expectations reinforced a form of self-surveillance. Women learned to monitor their desires, ambitions, and even emotions, evaluating every thought against the invisible metric of family approval and societal propriety. Yet amidst this pressure, subtle strategies of negotiation and quiet rebellion emerged, cultivating friendships, secretly pursuing intellectual or creative interests, or asserting small personal choices in dress or domestic management, providing fleeting, private moments of agency and autonomy. Even under constant scrutiny, these acts of quiet assertion offered relief, affirmation, and a sense of identity beyond the rigid matrix of duty. Family pressure, therefore, was both a guiding hand and a constraint, shaping lives with both protective and coercive force, ensuring that women's paths were directed, monitored, and constrained by obligation, while simultaneously cultivating the endurance, adaptability, and subtle ingenuity that became essential tools for survival within Victorian domestic and social life. In Victorian society, the lives of wives were tightly circumscribed by economic dependency and social expectation, leaving them with profoundly limited choices and reinforcing a system in which autonomy was sacrificed in exchange for security, social acceptance, and survival. Once married, a woman's legal and financial identity was largely absorbed by her husband under coverture laws, rendering her incapable of owning property independently, controlling her own income, or making legally recognized decisions about her household or personal welfare. Even in families with wealth, the management of resources, access to accounts, and authority over expenditures were frequently mediated by husbands, leaving wives dependent on their judgment and often vulnerable to economic control or manipulation. Employment opportunities were scarce and socially discouraged, with societal norms portraying professional or independent work as inappropriate for a married woman, and failure to adhere strictly to domestic duties as morally suspect. This dependency extended to social mobility and personal movement. Decisions about travel, hosting guests, or engaging in community activities were constrained by the husband's preferences, family expectations, and prevailing etiquette, creating a pervasive sense that one's life was dictated not by personal will, but by external authority. The lack of autonomy was compounded by legal and social structures that discouraged objection or resistance, complaining about household arrangements, questioning a husband's decisions, or expressing dissatisfaction was considered unladylike and often met with social censure or subtle forms of coercion. Even seemingly minor domestic choices, such as selecting clothing, decorating rooms, or organizing family schedules, were embedded within layers of expectation and constraint, requiring negotiation, careful observation, and discretion to avoid conflict. Psychological consequences of this dependency were significant. Women internalized the belief that their value was determined by obedience, social skill, and capacity to maintain domestic harmony, while personal ambitions, intellectual curiosity, or emotional needs were secondary, often suppressed or relegated to private, hidden spaces. Some women developed coping mechanisms, secret reading, journaling, private correspondence, or hobbies that could be pursued discreetly, allowing them to preserve fragments of identity and agency within a constricted framework. These small acts of autonomy provided emotional relief and mental stimulation, but could not fundamentally alter the structural imbalance of power that defined marital life, leaving women constantly aware of the fragility of their position and the ever-present need for caution and compliance. Dependency was not merely economic, but social and emotional. Reputations, family honor, and community perception dictated acceptable behavior, reinforcing self-discipline and internalized control while limiting the scope of rebellion. In essence, the institution of marriage created a paradoxical existence. Wives gained protection and social legitimacy, yet lost legal rights, freedom of choice, and substantial personal authority, navigating a life in which survival, acceptance, and reputation often demanded the suppression of self. The cumulative effect of these limitations shaped generations of women who were highly adept at negotiation, observation, and endurance, yet profoundly constrained in personal expression and independence. Victorian wives' existence became a careful balance of obedience, subtle assertion, and private resilience, revealing both the oppressive realities of dependency and the quiet ingenuity required to endure and maintain identity within a tightly controlled domestic and social structure. In Victorian society, the pressure to conform was amplified by the omnipresent gaze of neighbors, relatives, and social networks, where reputation became a currency as valuable and as dangerous as money, and where gossip and judgment served as tools of social control, shaping every action, gesture, and word of a wife. Even minor deviations from expected behavior could trigger subtle censure. A delayed letter, an improperly dressed child, or an unsanctioned visit could be discussed in whispers at a tea gathering, escalating into a perception of moral or domestic inadequacy. Women learned early that the household's appearance, the family's social standing, and their own comportment were intertwined, making them responsible not only for domestic management, but for maintaining the delicate facade of propriety and perfection that society demanded. Public perception dictated private behavior. What might have been a small indulgence or minor act of autonomy had to be carefully weighed against potential gossip, censure, or social exclusion. This constant monitoring extended to interactions with servants, friends, and even casual acquaintances. A mismanaged introduction, a misplaced word, or a lapse in etiquette could ripple outward, affecting both immediate and extended social networks. The fear of scandal and judgment instilled vigilance, self-discipline, and strategic thinking, as women anticipated social consequences in advance, often curbing natural inclinations to maintain the illusion of control and harmony. Even in private spaces, the awareness of reputation created an invisible pressure, shaping conversations, emotions, and behaviors with the subtle knowledge that breaches of decorum might eventually be revealed or inferred. Mothers, aunts, and older female relatives reinforced these social norms, acting both as guides and enforcers, ensuring that younger women internalized the rules of propriety and learned to navigate social expectation with skill and patience. Social gatherings, charitable work, and religious observance became stages where wives performed idealized versions of themselves, demonstrating grace, intelligence, and moral rectitude while concealing fatigue, fear, or private discontent. Failure to conform, more the perception thereof, could have lasting consequences, diminished marriage prospects, social isolation, and reputational damage that could affect family honor for generations. Within these constraints, subtle acts of quiet rebellion or assertion became forms of psychological survival. Choosing a slightly daring hat, hosting a small private conversation, or expressing opinion in measured ways allowed women to maintain a sense of individuality while avoiding overt confrontation with societal expectation. Over time, the intersection of social judgment, gossip, and the demand for conformity created a pervasive psychological cage. Women were constantly self-monitoring, negotiating the fine line between personal desire and public approval, and cultivating emotional resilience in the face of scrutiny. In effect, Victorian wives existed in a dual reality, outwardly performing perfection, grace, and propriety, while inwardly managing the tension, fatigue, and quiet indignation that accompanied the relentless social gaze. Their survival depended on tact, subtlety, and careful observation, balancing compliance with the small, often hidden acts of agency that allowed them to preserve selfhood in a world where reputation dictated opportunity, freedom, and emotional security. Social judgment was not merely external, it became internalized, creating a culture of self-policing in which the line between personal morality and public perception blurred, and in which every thought, gesture, and choice carried weight far beyond the immediate moment, underscoring the pervasive and enduring power of societal expectation in shaping the domestic and emotional lives of Victorian wives. The daily life of a Victorian wife was an unrelenting physical ordeal, a ceaseless cycle of household labor, social obligations, child rearing, and meticulous management of servants, which left her body chronically fatigued, often in pain, and vulnerable to both acute and long-term health consequences. From the break of dawn, she was on her feet, tending to the cleanliness of floors, windows, and fabrics, preparing multiple meals with careful attention to both nutrition and presentation, and overseeing children's education and moral development, all while maintaining the polished appearance of the home for potential guests and visitors. The labor was physically exacting. Heavy laundry required strenuous scrubbing, mopping, and boiling. Meal preparation involved lifting heavy pots, constant movement, and exposure to heat or sharp implements. And the long hours of supervision demanded standing for extended periods, bending, reaching, and moving with precision to ensure tasks were executed perfectly. Even clothing contributed to the physical strain. tightly laced corsets restricted breathing, compressed the torso, and caused chronic discomfort, while heavy skirts, layered petticoats, and restrictive undergarments impeded movement, creating a daily tension between societal expectations of femininity and the practical realities of labor. These physical demands, compounded by the mental and emotional labor of constant vigilance over household and social duties, left many women exhausted, often suffering from chronic fatigue, headaches, digestive problems, and other stress-related ailments, illnesses that were easily treated to days, such as minor infections, influenza, or nutritional deficiencies could become serious threats, exacerbated by exhaustion and limited medical knowledge, particularly for women of lower middle and working class households where conditions were even harsher. Pain and fatigue were normalized, often dismissed as the inevitable consequences of being a good wife, reinforcing the expectation that endurance, perseverance, and silent suffering were virtues to be cultivated and displayed. Even leisure or rest was regimented. Women were expected to maintain composure during meals, social visits, or family gatherings, preventing genuine relaxation. While sleep could be interrupted by household emergencies, children's needs, or the pressures of social expectation. Nutritional inadequacies, overwork, and limited access to fresh air or exercise further compromised health, leaving women prone to weakness, anemia, and heightened susceptibility to disease. The constant pressure to maintain appearances, coupled with physically taxing routines, created a cycle of exhaustion and illness that few had the opportunity to break, forcing women to perform daily tasks with courage and determination despite chronic physical strain. Over time, this relentless labor and bodily discipline contributed not only to declining health, but also to the shaping of domestic hierarchies, where the endurance and physical labor of wives underpinned the smooth functioning of the household, while remaining largely invisible and unappreciated. In essence, the Victorian domestic ideal demanded not only perfection and grace, but the subjugation of the body to relentless labor, demonstrating the profound physical cost of maintaining appearances, authority, and familial cohesion. The interplay of exhaustion, chronic pain, and societal expectation illustrates that the domestic sphere, far from being a sanctuary, was a place where the body became a site of constant labor, endurance, and quiet suffering, leaving women physically, mentally, and emotionally taxed by a system designed to demand perfection at every turn.